This day and time. What happened today, years ago.
Okay, let's get into this. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us, articles, notes, research, and really dig deep to pull out the key insights.
Think of it as us doing the heavy lifting, finding the core story, and maybe some surprising bits along the way.
Exactly. And today, our mission is Tannenberg, the Battle of Tannenberg, August 1914, Eastern Front, World War I. We've got your sources here, and we're going to unpack the German victory, the Russian disaster, and what it all meant.
Right, the lasting impact, the symbolism for both sides. It's a huge story.
So let's set the scene. August 1914, war's just broken out. We often think of the Western Front, right? Trenches, stalemate pretty quickly.
Yeah, but the East was completely different, especially at the start. The scale was just immense. Baltic to the Black Sea. Huge spaces.
Which meant room for maneuver, big troop movements, very different feel from the West.
Definitely. Cavalry was still a factor. Scouting, raiding, things you just didn't see much in France and Belgium once things locked down.
And the trigger, of course, Austria-Hungary, Serbia, but Russia jumping in to back Serbia. Germany saw that as a direct threat.
Absolutely. Which led to Germany's big gamble.
Yeah.
The Schlieffen Plan, modified version. Focus everything on France first. Knock them out quick.
Because they assumed Russia would be slow to mobilize.
Exactly. They initially put, only about 10% of their army facing east? A massive calculation based on Russian speed.
But Russia had its own plans, right? These schedules.
Yeah, originally Schedule 19, which was more defensive, but the French were pushing them hard to attack immediately, relieve the pressure on the West.
Ah, okay, so political pressure changed the military plan.
Right. In 1912, they switched to Schedule 19A. An immediate offensive into East Prussia and Galicia, even before they were fully ready. A very risky move looking back.
And in the surprise, the Russians actually did move fast into East Prussia, faster than Germany expected.
Totally blindsided them. And forced a huge decision. Pull troops from the west. About 250,000 men diverted to the east.
And that diversion, we need to remember that. It has major consequences later for the Western Front, doesn't it?
Huge consequences. We'll definitely come back to that.
It's interesting, though. The sources seem to contradict themselves on Russian mobilization. Slow, underprepared, but also unexpectedly rapid, a miracle.
Yeah, it's confusing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think the key is the difference between starting an attack quickly, which they did, because France was demanding it, and being truly ready operationally.
So they could get boots on the ground, but maybe not the full support.
Exactly. Logistics, supplies, maybe even training for some units. They launched the offensive, but were they really prepared for a sustained fight? Probably not. Politics likely trumped military readiness.
Plus, Germany had that built-in advantage, the railways.
Oh, massive advantage. Their rail network was dense, designed specifically for rapid military movement towards the borders.
Whereas Russia's was less developed.
Much less. Limited network, vast distances, and crucially a different track gauge, meaning everything, troops, supplies had to be transferred at the border. Hugely time-consuming.
So that industrial difference directly translates to military capability.
Absolutely. A fundamental pre-existing edge for Germany.
Okay, so who are the actual forces moving into East Prussia?
Two main Russian armies. The First Army, under General Rennenkampf, and the Second Army, under General Samsonov.
And they had more troops initially.
Numerically superior, yes, according to the sources. But numbers aren't everything, as we'll see.
Because there was a huge problem with coordination.
A critical weakness. Deep lack of coordination between those two armies. And it gets worse.
How so?
Your sources point to documented personal hostility between Rennenkampf and Samsonov. They actively disliked each other.
Wow. On top of operational issues.
Yeah, and Samsonov's Second Army in particular was noted as lacking transport and having poor communication systems overall. Just a recipe for disaster brewing.
And who were they facing on the German side initially?
The German Eighth Army, commanded by General von Prittwitz. Maybe 150,000 troops.
So the Russians attack first.
Rennenkampf's First Army does. They hit parts of Prittwitz's force at Gumbinnen, August 19th, 20th. And Rennenkampf actually won that battle.
Really? An initial Russian victory?
Yeah, inflicted maybe 14,000, 15,000 casualties on the Germans. not insignificant.
So how did Prittwitz react to losing that first encounter?
Badly. Really badly. The sources say he panicked, called German high command, saying he was going to retreat the entire 8th Army behind the Vistula River.
Meaning giving up all of East Prussia.
It's essentially, yes, abandoning territory, going completely against established German defensive plans for that area. They had prepared positions within East Prussia.
What did High Command do?
They acted fast, fired Prittwitz and his deputy on the spot,
And replaced them with?
pulled General Paul von Hindenburg out of retirement, an older general, but crucially,
He knew the area.
obsessively well. Spent years studying the East Prussian terrain, the lakes, the forests, knew it like the back of his hand. And they paired him with General Erich Ludendorff as his chief of staff. A dynamic duo.
That command change sounds absolutely critical.
It was pivotal. You see the contrast immediately. Prittwitz losing his nerve versus the calm, experienced Hindenburg and Ludendorff arriving.
It highlights that human element again, doesn't it? Leadership, personality.
Absolutely. Prittwitz's panic versus the new team's resolve. And on the Russian side, that Samsonov-Rennenkampf personal friction undermining everything. It's not just about troop numbers. Human factors were key.
So Hindenburg and Ludendorff arrive. What's their first move?
They link up with Colonel Max Hoffman, who was Prittwitz's operations guy, and really understood the situation locally. And together, they immediately grasp the key Russian weaknesses.
Which were?
That geographic split between the two Russian armies caused by the Masurian Lakes, and that fatal lack of coordination between Rennenkampf and Samsonov.
They decide to exploit that split.
Exactly. Hoffman apparently drafted the initial plan, focused everything on Samsonov's Second Army first. Ludendorff, the strategist, reviewed it, refined it, and made the call.
Which was a risky call, right?
Hugely risky. They decided to pull most of their forces away from facing Rennenkampf near Gumbinnen, leaving just a thin cavalry screen there.
To achieve overwhelming strength against Samsonov somewhere else.
Precisely. Concentrate everything against Samsonov's exposed left flank. A calculated gamble.
And then comes the intelligence breakthrough.
Ah, yes. This is where it gets incredible. Your sources call it Russia's unaccountable carelessness. They were sending tactical radio messages,
Not coded.
completely in the clear. Unencrypted, operational plans, troop movements, objectives, unit locations, everything.
Wow, just handed to the Germans on a platter.
Pretty much. It gave the Germans accurate real-time intelligence. Hoffman famously said something like, "Nobody really won the battle, it just happened. The Russians sent their signals in the clear, we knew their plans."
So they were intercepting both Samsonov and Rennenkampf.
Yes, allowing them to know exactly what both armies were intending to do, or crucially not intending to do. This is classic signals intelligence.
And the Germans had some experience with this already.
They did. Your sources mentioned they'd been intercepting Russian and French signals since 1913. But Tannenberg was where they really hit the intelligence jackpot.
So they have this amazing intelligence, and they have the plan to concentrate on Samsonov. How do they make it happen?
Logistics again, the German railway network. They used it to rapidly move troops. The example given is von Francois' Corps shifted over 100 miles by train very quickly to get into position to hit Samsonov's flank near Uzda.
That speed was crucial.
Absolutely instrumental. It allowed them to turn intelligence into action, concentrating force precisely where needed.
And those Masurian lakes, they played a role beyond just separating the armies.
Definitely. They physically channeled the Russian advance, slowed them down, made it harder for them to support each other, and funneled them into areas the Germans could target. It fit perfectly with pre-war German defensive thinking about using terrain to break up attacks.
So it's a combination of factors driving the German success here.
A powerful synergy, really. Superior intelligence from SIGINT, superior logistics via rail to act on that intelligence, and smart use of geography to isolate the enemy.
The SIGINT was like a force multiplier.
Exactly. But it needed the logistics and the leadership, Hindenburg's terrain knowledge, Ludendorff's decisiveness, to actually work. It was the integration of all these elements.
And Ludendorff's gamble to leave Rennenkampf lightly screened, that paid off because of the intercepts.
Yes, intercepted messages suggested Rennenkampf wasn't advancing aggressively. Ludendorff didn't just exploit a communication error. He made a judgment call based on the likely actions and perhaps the known caution, or maybe even the hostility towards Samsonov of the opposing commander. It was psychologically astute as well as militarily bold.
It's interesting, though, that source saying Germany was also transmitting in the clear sometimes.
That's a fascinating point.
Yeah.
It suggests maybe nobody fully grasped the risks of radio interception yet, Or maybe speed was prioritized over security in the heat of the moment.
So there was an element of luck involved.
Definitely seems like it. Germany's clear transmissions weren't exploited by Russia in the same way. Russia's carelessness was just disastrously total, and Germany capitalized fully. It highlights the importance of SIGINT and counterintelligence even back then.
Okay, so the trap is set. How does the actual battle unfold?
It happens quickly, mainly August 26th to 30th. The Germans achieved near total surprise against Samsonov's Second Army.
Even though Samsonov was advancing.
Yeah, incredibly, his troops kept pushing forward, stretched out over a huge front, something like 60 miles. They were basically walking deeper into the encirclement, and sources say they often outran their supplies.
So logistically, they were already struggling.
Massively. Then the Germans unleashed a heavy artillery barrage. The Russians tried to retreat, but it was too late. German forces were converging from multiple directions, cutting off escape routes.
Leading to chaos.
A great slaughter, as your sources put it. By August 29th, the main body of Samsonov's army, maybe 3 corps, was completely trapped in a forest area. No way out. Total breakdown, mass surrenders.
Let's quickly recap those key reasons for the Russian collapse, based on the sources.
Okay. First, command divisions. That Samsonov-Rennenkampf hostility, meaning Rennenkampf just didn't move to help Samsonov. Fatal lack of coordination.
For a second.
Logistics. Severe shortages for Samsonov transport, food, everything. Poor roads, different rail gauge, troops exhausted before fighting.
Third.
Underestimation. Samsonov just didn't realize the scale of the German forces moving against him or their plan until it slammed shut.
Fourth, communications again.
Absolutely. Communication failures. That constant use of unencrypted radio gave the Germans everything. Unaccountable carelessness.
And finally, just general organization.
Yeah, Russian disorganization. Less experienced troops compared to the Germans. Many reserves weren't fully prepared. Plus, leadership turmoil within Samsonov's army itself.
And the tragic end for Samsonov.
Facing the complete annihilation of his army, he committed suicide in the forest on August 30th. A devastating personal end to a military catastrophe.
So not just one mistake, but a whole system collapsing under pressure.
Exactly. It was a culmination of deep-seated problems, command issues, logistics, communications, training exposed brutally by the German attack. The conditions for disaster were already there.
And the Germans immediately compared it to Cannae.
Deliberately. The Second Cannae. It fit their ideal of a decisive battle of annihilation through encirclement. Showed maneuver warfare was still possible, especially in the East, unlike the West. It reinforced that whole doctrine for them.
The human cost must have been immense. What do the sources say about casualties?
Catastrophic for the Russians. Killed and wounded estimated between 30,000 and 50,000, but the number of prisoners is staggering. 92,000 to 95,000 captured.
So basically, Samsonov's entire army was wiped out.
Pretty much. 2.5 corps destroyed, only about 10,000 soldiers out of roughly 150,000 escaped pocket.
And German losses.
Incredibly light by comparison, somewhere between 13,000 and maybe 20,000 total casualties. The disparity is just huge.
What happened immediately after Tannenberg? Did the Germans pause?
No pause. They immediately used their railways again, shifted forces north, and went straight after Rennenkampf's First Army.
Leading to another battle.
Yes, the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes, early September. Another German victory. They pushed Rennenkampf back, took tens of thousands more prisoners, and cleared the Russians out of East Prussia entirely.
So 2 quick, decisive victories back to back.
Right. Tannenberg created the conditions for the Masurian Lakes win, exploited the Russian confusion and demoralization. By mid-September, those 2 initial Russian invading armies were effectively gone as fighting forces.
A massive strategic success for Germany early in the war secured their eastern flank.
And a huge boost to German morale, while delivering a devastating blow to Russia's strength and confidence in that theater.
Now let's talk about the legacy, the meaning attached to Tannenberg. It became more than just a battle, didn't it?
Oh, hugely symbolic. For Germany, first, the name itself, Tannenberg. It wasn't fought right there, but they deliberately chose the name. As revenge for the medieval Battle of Tannenberg-Grunwald in 1410, where the Teutonic Knights were defeated by Polish-Lithuanian forces, framing the 1914 win as settling an old score, restoring German honor, pure historical narrative construction.
And the second Cannae idea.
That became a powerful national myth, promoted heavily during the war, through the Weimar years, into the Nazi era, symbolized German military genius, decisive mobile warfare triumphing over sheer numbers.
Elevating Hindenburg and Ludendorff.
To national heroes, especially Hindenburg, the hero of Tannenberg. Their image was cultivated as symbols of strength and victory, which helped pave the way for their later political dominance.
And the myth served other purposes, too.
Definitely. It offset the less glorious outcome at the Marne in the West, and it was used in propaganda to claim the war was defensive forced on Germany by the Russian giant. Connects the victory to narratives of victimhood and defense.
Did it have influence after the war, during the Weimar Republic?
Yes. Sources suggest the Tannenberg myth helped bolster authoritarian and militaristic sentiments during that unstable period. It fed into anti-democratic narratives, including the Dolchstoßlegend, the stab-in-the-back myth.
How'd it connect to that?
By making Hindenburg and Ludendorff untouchable heroes, it became easier to blame Germany's ultimate defeat on civilians, politicians, internal betrayal, anyone but the revered military leadership.
And they even built a huge memorial.
The Tannenberg Memorial, yes, a massive symbolic structure, became a rallying point for nationalist and militarist sentiment, later used extensively by the Nazis. Chillingly, Operation Tannenberg was the Nazi codename for actions related to the invasion of Poland in 1939. The myth had legs.
What about the Russian narrative? Very different, I assume.
Completely different. The dominant interpretation within Russia, especially among the Allies, became one of sacrifice to save Paris.
Framing the disaster as a necessary price.
Exactly. A noble, if tragic, sacrifice made under Allied pressure to divert German troops from the West and prevent France's collapse.
But alongside that, wasn't there blame internally?
Yes. A very damaging narrative of General Rennenkampf's treachery gained traction, blaming him personally for not supporting Samsonov, sometimes tied to conspiracy theories.
And the impact on morale.
Devastating. A heavy blow leading to a loss of faith in their own army's ability to win. This only got worse as the war dragged on.
How did post-revolutionary Russia view Tannenberg?
Soviet military thinkers studied it closely. Their conclusion, not German superiority, but the mediocrity of high Russian military leadership. They saw the initial offensive itself as a potentially flawed, thankless mission forced on them.
But Russian emigres had a different take.
Often, yes. They tended to embrace the heroic sacrifice narrative, linking it to nostalgia for the old Tsarist Russia, fulfilling an obligation to allies. It became part of their identity in exile.
So, two completely different ways of remembering the same event?
Precisely. It shows how history gets shaped and used after the fact. Germany. Revenge, genius, vindication. Russia. Sacrifice, betrayal, incompetence. Powerful tools for national identity and politics. The German myth, in particular, had dangerous long-term consequences.
Feeding into that stab-in-the-back myth.
Right. Glorifying the early victory and its leaders made it harder to accept the reality of the later defeat, pushing blame onto internal enemies instead of acknowledging military or strategic failures. A dangerous path.
Let's zoom out again. Broader impact on WWI.
Well, Tannenberg underscores how different the Eastern Front was. Room for maneuver, big encirclements, boiler battles, unlike the Western Front's rapid descent into static trench warfare. It complicates the simple picture of WWI.
And that troop transfer from the West, we said we'd come back to it.
Yes. Critically important. Those two German corps didn't make it to Tannenberg in time to fight, but their absence from the Western Front in early September was huge.
Because of the Battle of the Marne.
Exactly. The Germans were advancing on Paris. The Schlieffen plan seemed to be working, but they were stopped at the Marne. The absence of those diverted corps pulled away because of the unexpectedly fast Russian advance that led to Tannenberg.
Might have tipped the balance at the Marne?
Many historians argue it significantly contributed to the failure of the Schlieffen plan and the subsequent stalemate on the Western Front. Russia's attack, leading to their own disaster at Tannenberg.
Ironically, helped save France.
That's the tragic strategic trade-off. Russia paid an appalling price, but their initial offensive, their sacrifice, likely played a key indirect role in preventing a quick German victory overall. Shows the deep interdependence of the Allied war effort.
And the long-term impact on Russia itself.
Tannenberg was a huge blow to morale, part of a pattern of massive losses and strain that ultimately fueled social upheaval.
Contributing to the conditions for revolution.
It certainly contributed. The immense cost of the war, punctuated by defeats like Tannenberg, eroded faith in the Tsar and the military leadership, destabilized society, and paved the way for the 1917 revolution and Russia's exit from the war. The Eastern Front was decisive for Russia's fate.
Okay, let's quickly touch on historical debates. The role of SIGINT.
Still debated. Many accounts, including Hoffman's, emphasize it as the key factor. Unprecedented intelligence advantage.
But it wasn't the only factor.
No, scholars caution against that simplicity. German analysis of the intelligence, effective maneuvering, exploiting terrain, Hindenburg's knowledge. Those were crucial too, and critically, Russian disorganization and logistical failures created the vulnerability in the first place.
So a complex mix.
Very complex. As one source says, the number of reasons depends on your point of view.
And that point about Germany also sending clear signals keeps coming up.
Right, the element of luck. German capability was better, but Russia's carelessness was more widespread and more decisively exploited. Germany got lucky, their own lapses weren't turned against them in the same way.
And Pripyat's being replaced wasn't just about panic, but about not following the plan.
Yes, abandoning East Prussia went against the core Schlieffen-era defensive concepts for the East. His removal and the arrival of Hindenburg Ludendorff, who did follow and adapt those plans, was part of that complex picture. So the consensus seems to be less about a single silver bullet like SIGINT and more about successful integration.
Integration of what?
Doctrine, technology, rail, radio intercepts, leadership, terrain knowledge, intelligence analysis, and decisive action. Germany integrated these elements effectively. Russia failed catastrophically at integration and coordination.
Plus that element of luck regarding the intercept.
Right. Skill-mat opportunity created by Russian errors and chance favored the Germans.
So wrapping up, Tannenberg 1914, a complex event.
Absolutely. A tactical masterpiece for Germany, a disaster for Russia. Showcased intelligence, logistics, leadership exploiting weaknesses.
But also deeply symbolic. The second Kenna myth versus the sacrifice narrative shaped national identities for decades.
And a reminder of the Eastern Front's unique character in WWI, mobile, brutal, decisive battles possible there.
While also having that huge indirect strategic impact on the West via the Marne.
A costly sacrifice with unintended consequences. Studying Tannenberg isn't just military history, it's about memory, myth-making, and the tangled web of cause and effect in war. The debates continue.
Which leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. Given everything we've discussed, the clashing personalities, the infrastructure gaps, the radio intercepts, the deliberate myth-making afterwards, how much of a victory like Tannenberg comes down to pure strategic brilliance versus simply one side's strengths hitting the other side's weaknesses at just the right moment, maybe helped by a bit of luck. Something to chew on.
Indeed. A lot to think about there.
Thank you for providing the sources that fueled this deep dive. We hope this breakdown of Tannenberg was insightful.
Keep sending in those fascinating topics.
And keep exploring. We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.
Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and ring that bell for more history daily.